Now I'd like to introduce Dr. Jaedeok Yoo. Dr. Jae has been focusing on the application of 3DP in the research and development and pharmaceutical manufacturing. His 3DP journey began at MIT in the early 1990s, where he developed and used a 3DP process based on inkjet printing to produce advanced ceramic materials with a composition gradient. So, from Aprecia Pharmaceuticals, a round of applause for Dr. Jaedeok Yoo.
Thank you. Well, thanks for having me here this morning, and I would like to actually talk to you about how three-dimensional printing can be used for pharmaceutical applications. So here's a brief overview of the talk. Wanted to actually give you a heads up on what are the 3D printing technologies that are actually used for pharmaceuticals, and give you some of the advantages. Why actually do you want to use 3D printing for making dosage forms, and give you some specific examples. And then give you a little bit taste of what are the technical and regulatory issues when you're dealing with three-dimensional printing for making dosage forms, and conclude with looking ahead. So I actually picked out three main three-dimensional printing techniques that have been applied to making dosage forms. The first one shown here is fused deposition modeling, also called material extrusion technology. It's used and it's very popular because it is very simple and very portable process that can make a lot of different types of dosage forms. The second one shown here is the binder jetting technology, where you start with powder material and use inkjet printing to selectively bind them together. It's very ideal for pharmaceutical applications because the selection of the materials that you have to use for binder jetting is very similar to what is already being used for pharmaceutical dosage forms. So you can just take the materials off the shelf and then start using it for 3D printing. The final one that's shown on the right is the polyjet, or the material jetting technology. And it is very attractive technology because it is able to put in a lot of complex shapes and also complex composition within a dosage form. So here's the answer to why would you even bother to use three-dimensional printing for making tablets when there are conventional technologies that can punch out tablets, hundreds of thousands of tablets an hour. So shown on the left-hand column are really the features of the 3D printing technology that's actually relevant to pharmaceutical industry. The first one is controlling the internal and external geometry. We all know that it's very easy to change those based on your input CAD files. The second is spatial control of composition. By that, what we mean is that you are able to control what ingredient goes into which section of the tablet. For some of the technologies, you can use very simple and compact process in comparison to what's already being used for pharmaceutical industry. And finally, the ability to prototype dosage forms very rapidly. And what that really translates to people in the pharmaceutical industry are shown on the right. Basically, you can make dosage forms or tablets with very unique properties that are very difficult to make using the conventional techniques. Some of the examples are shown here. The first one is tablets that are made so that they can instantly disperse when you put them into your mouth. And those are very useful for people who have actually swallowing difficulties. Making tablets with ultra low dose. Actually, I'll show you why it's very difficult to do in using conventional techniques. Making tablets with complex release profiles that are actually matched to the physiological needs of the patients. Making combinational therapies, and making tablets that are very hard to copy. Those are the different types of the dosage forms that you can make using three-dimensional printing. And you can actually somewhat simplify the supply chain that's very complex and very long with the current conventional technologies. And finally, accelerate the development cycle for pharmaceutical products. So I'm going to just show you a short video of the rapidly dispersing dosage forms. It's called zip dose technology, developed by Aprecia Pharmaceuticals. There it's basically showing how quickly the dosage form disperses when it comes into contact with water. So roughly in 4 seconds or less than 10 seconds, your tablet will completely disperse in the mouth. And actually shown on the right as a comparison is a conventionally made orally dispersing tablet. And as you can see, it's very difficult to get it to disperse very quickly in the mouth. And what happens in the patient's tongue at this point is that you may actually start to feel or start to taste the bitterness of the drug, and you'll actually start to maybe chew the tablet and so on, which will actually make the matters worse. So what we found by applying three-dimensional printing to making these rapidly dispersing tablets is that by using controlled binding of the powder with the inks that you print, you can make very quickly dispersing tablets. And the conventional techniques that were available were only able to address very low dose compounds. And when you actually think about it, when you're dealing with very high dose compounds, the tablets actually tend to get bigger and bigger, become more difficult to swallow. So what was happening is that with the conventional pharmaceutical technologies, such as soft compaction or freeze drying, you are only addressing the low end of the market where the need isn't that great. So what we found with 3D printing is that you can make very porous tablets that disperse very quickly. Second set of examples that I wanted to show you is highly accurate low-dose products. Typical pharmaceutical tablets are made by blending the active ingredient, usually called active pharmaceutical ingredient or API, blending it with a lot of excipients. Those are the functional materials or just fillers that are used so that you can actually make a tablet using compaction process. And what happens is that this very low amount of the drug is very difficult to blend into a uniform blend. And also it's very difficult to keep it blended. So they tend to have a lot of problems in manufacturing these types of tablets. So the approach that we've found is that you can use three-dimensional printing to make the tablet in layer-by-layer fashion and only deposit the API in the middle of the tablet where it's needed. And it leads to very accurate and precise dosing. And also it makes it to be a very simple and safe process to run. So shown in the example here is how accurately and how precisely you can control the dosage forms. And one of the example products that would have actually really benefited from this technology is shown on the lower right. It's a product called Synthroid. It's levothyroxine sodium. And as you can see, there are like 12 different doses that the manufacturers have to make between 25 micrograms to 300 micrograms. And you have to control the dose very tightly. So this is one of those examples where three-dimensional printing might provide an advantage over the conventional techniques. Here's one of the examples of using three-dimensional printing to make somewhat complex dosage form, complex in the sense of the concentration gradient. So you can make a tablet that has a core that's much higher in concentration of the API than on the outside. And when this tablet starts to dissolve or starts to go through the dissolution, what you will have is the outside of the tablet releasing the API, and the surface area of the tablet reduces as the time goes by. And that reduction in the surface area is compensated for by the concentration increase in the core of the tablet. So what you see in the right-hand side of the graph is basically being able to maintain a zero order release profile by using this technique. You can go one step further and make a dosage form that has different regions containing different APIs, or the same API that's releasing in a different rate. So shown here is a very simple dosage form shown on the upper right that has top and bottom layers and the core that contains the API. And basically, you are able to control somewhat of a pulsatile release of the dosage form. And shown in here are examples of two different products that were tested for this. Some people have been using 3D printing to make different size and shape dosage forms. So shown here are some examples collected from the works from University of Nottingham and also University College London that tested many different types of dosage forms, cubes, pyramids, spheres, and toruses, as well as tablets that have different surface area. So by controlling the amount of the surface area and also the ratio of the surface area to the volume, you can change the release rate starting from the exact same material. Last example that I wanted to show is basically embedding different types of codes inside of a tablet so that it's very hard to copy. Shown on the upper right are pictures of tablets that are just difficult to copy, and you can actually see that it's difficult to copy. So one of the tablets, the white tablets, they actually contain a code, the product code inside. So even a patient, if they're suspecting maybe they have a counterfeit product, they can just cut the tablet open to check if that is an authentic product. That's very important because there are a lot of counterfeit products that are going around where the manufacturers might know how to test for the authenticity, but it's very difficult for the patients to confirm that. So a simple strategy like that could be very useful. Or you can also embed some covert markers into a tablet. So shown in here are basically a fluorescent dyes that are actually put into the tablet, and you can analyze for it or actually see it in a different lighting condition to confirm that you have the right dosage form. So now that I've shown you some examples of the different types of dosage forms, I just wanted to cover quickly some of the key considerations for applying 3D printing to pharmaceuticals. There are really four main points. Number one is achieving the speed and scale that's relevant for pharmaceuticals. Number two is complying with the regulatory requirements. And then making the economic sense. And finally, identifying and meeting the really unmet needs rather than just trying to do things differently just for the sake of making it differently. So first, 3D printing at commercial scale. It requires just a lot of different thinking about how to speed up the process. So what we ended up doing is to somewhat reverse the process so that you have a lot of these what we call the pallets that are moving around underneath a stationary powder dispenser and spreader and the inkjet printers. So by applying this concept, we were able to get about 100-fold increase in the throughput of the process, making it somewhat relevant for pharmaceutical manufacture. Number two is really complying with the regulatory requirements. You need a lot of stainless steel to be in pharmaceutical industry, and more stainless steel, and a lot of paperwork. And these are really important and necessary because without proper control, you cannot assure that you have the proper quality that the patients deserve. And making sense of the economics. I just actually highlighting a few numbers here. You may have actually heard this $3.6 billion to make or develop a pharmaceutical product. And that's if you're just looking at the 2014 numbers. And that number has been growing at roughly about 8.5% a year. So by this year, maybe it's closer to $4 billion to get a new drug to the market. So there is a huge impetus for us to maybe speed up that process or to make that process more efficient. And one of the numbers that I find interesting is that the FDA has been giving out these priority review vouchers for rare disease drug developers. And there is actually a secondary market for these vouchers, and companies can buy and sell these vouchers and apply them for different types of products. And if you look at the prices of these, they roughly go about maybe 100 million pounds per voucher. And that roughly equates to about $1 million per day of savings that these companies are getting for getting this priority review vouchers. So that's rough, I guess, rule of thumb for how much does it really, what is the value of increasing the productivity in the R&D and maybe saving a day or a month in the development process. And I'll actually just skip through the case study, but it's basically meant to say that there are some products that are based on very old compounds, but put into a new format and is able to really address the unmet needs of the patients, as well as to make a huge economic benefit to the companies. So I just wanted to conclude with some of the views from people from the FDA that have been looking at three-dimensional printing and looking at what kinds of benefits really 3D printing can bring to the healthcare industry. And you'll see a lot of personalized medicine in those concepts, and perhaps increasing the manufacturing efficiency and so on. But we really have a believer in the FDA that wants to see the three-dimensional printing really help the healthcare industry and the pharmaceutical industry to make things better and faster and cheaper. So with that, I would like to conclude. Thanks for your attention.